going to be talking to us about her new book, Celtic Magic, A Practitioner's Guide. And this book not only traces the long-term history of Celtic magic, looking at classical roots as well as post-medieval afterlives, but also is meant to provide you with some magic that you can do yourself. So, for those of you who may have overindulged last night, you can learn a medieval Welsh hangover cure, curses to place upon your enemies, and a wide variety of other very useful things. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Brigid, who will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have 15 to 20 minutes of time at the end for questions. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see so many people out today. Thanks for turning up on your weekend. I thought I would start by reading a little bit from the book. Eliza mentioned curses. I think we'll start with the curses. But since she's also mentioned the hangover cure, make sure that I'll get there in the end. If I've forgotten to do it, ask me in the questions, and I'll bring that up. All right, imagine you're in Roman Britain in the 4th or the 5th century CE. A man named Silvianus charges out of the Temple of Nodens, blinking and irate. He has gone to sleep in the temple precinct for the night, hoping that the priests of Nodens will be able to interpret his recurring bad dreams and suggest a cure. And now, his favorite golden ring, with an engraving of Venus, is gone. But he knows who to blame. That scoundrel Sinicianus. Silvianus knows that vengeance is required. Nodens won't stand for this theft in his sacred temple, and the god is going to make Sinicianus and all of his family pay for what they have done. Indignant and spouting maledictions, Silvianus bustles off to get a thin sheet of lead and a stylus with which to pen his grievance to the god. Some distance away, in the town of Caleva Atrabatum, Sinicianus brings his newly acquired ring to an engraver's shop. He doesn't want anyone to doubt that it is in fact his property, so he's going to have his name inscribed on it, and that of his new god. Venus can stay on the bezel of the ring, but Sinicianus now only worships the Christian god, and he is going to protect his devotee. Sinicianus laughs at the thought that Silvianus might ask his ineffectual pagan deities for retribution. He is well beyond their power now. So this is a fictionalized account of an actual loss and attempted recovery of a ring in 5th or perhaps late 4th century Roman Britain. We know about it from a curse written on a thin sheet of lead that was found at the site of a Romano-British temple dedicated to the god Nodens at Lydney Park in Gloucestershire. This sort of curse is known as a defixio, which is Latin for binding. And the idea is that it magically binds or somehow fastens the target of the curse, or the supernatural powers enacting the curse, to the will of the author, in order to produce the desired outcome. The thin sheet of metal on which it is written is known as a lamella. The full inscription on the Lydney Park curse tablet, in Latin, reads, in translation, "To the god Nodens, Silvianus has lost his ring and given half of its value to Nodens. Among those who are called Sinicianus, do not allow health until he brings it back to the temple of Nodens." Silvianus's defixio is a typical curse inscription from the Greco-Roman world. It asks a deity to help recover lost property and to avenge the author upon the suspected thief. And in this case, like in the case of many other curse tablets from antiquity, it promises a reward to the god, in this case the value or half the value of the stolen ring, which presumably will be donated to the temple shrine. What is unusual in this case is that archaeologists have probably found the stolen ring that it mentions. In 1785, a gold ring was unearthed in the ruins of Romano-British Caleva Atrabatum, a town near modern Silchester, which is about 70 miles away from the Temple of Nodens at Lydney Park. If anyone wants to go see it, the ring is currently held in the Vine, which is a National Trust property located a few miles away from where it was found. Engraved on the square bezel is the name Venus and the image of a face in profile, probably representing the goddess. I will say it's not very good artistic craftsmanship. Maybe this is me bringing my modern judgments to it. Maybe someone in Romano-British context would look at this and say this is beautiful, but I don't think it's a terribly high status production as far as rings go. There's a picture of it in the book. You can tell it's a person, and probably not a porcupine, but it's a very basic kind of profile, so it's very handy that it's labeled. And in Latin, along the band of the ring, it also says the words, "Sinicionis, may you live in God." While the inscriptions on both the curse tablet and the ring itself are in Latin, the name of the god that they're invoking, Nodens, is Celtic. Versions of this name survive in the later Irish and Welsh languages, so it's likely that Nodens was known in some form over a larger Celtic-speaking geographic area. The fact that Silvianus asks Nodens to withhold good health from Sinicionis until the ring is returned echoes the god's probable associations with medicine and healing. The Temple of Nodens at Lydney Park might have been a local healing center, reflecting a hybrid Romano-British cult. The deity was Celtic in origin, but at his temple at Lydney Park, he was worshipped with all the trappings of a traditional Roman cult, including a bathhouse and a mosaic with classical Roman sea creature designs. Inscriptions here link Nodens with the Roman god Mars, indicating that they were syncretized or linked together in the minds of their worshippers, like many Celtic and Roman gods across the Celtic-speaking world. Several small figurines in the shape of dogs were also found at the site, and probably associated with Nodens in some capacity. Although the dramatic version of events that I've given you to start with here is based on archaeological evidence, it's still ultimately fiction. We don't know for sure that Silvianus was at the temple to be healed, although this is a reasonable guess since it seems like it's a healing cult site. We don't know for sure that he lost the ring while asleep there, or even that the ring found near Silchester was actually the same one that was stolen, although the coincidence is striking. There are several other instances of the name Sinicionis from Roman Britain, including in one of the curses found at Bath. So it may simply have been a pretty common name. Maybe this is the equivalent of John for the inhabitants of Roman Britain. These other Sinicioni might have been entirely separate individuals or members of one extended family, although we still can't discount the possibility that one of them was a prolific thief, stealing small items across Roman Britain. It has also been suggested that the Sinicionis whose name appears on the ring was an early British Christian. This is speculation, but the formula, "may so-and-so live in God," is typical of early Christian inscriptions. It's possible, of course, that this was merely meant to mean a god rather than the Christian God. There's no capitalization here to help us at this point in time. But either way, it invoked the protection of some deity in this world and probably the next. We could also keep in mind that the engraving of Venus on the bezel might have been original or might have been added at a later date. It covers up part of the end of the inscription on the band, which is either poor planning from the inscriber's perspective or perhaps evidence that the artifact has been reused later. So then maybe we have a Christian artifact being repurposed to show Venus rather than a pagan Greco-Roman artifact repurposed for a new Christian owner. Nevertheless, even with some uncertainties, the defixio and the stolen ring make for a good story, and one that illuminates many features of daily magic in Roman Britain, and indeed in other parts of the Greco-Roman world, where speakers of Celtic languages and cults of Celtic gods were present alongside their Greek and Roman counterparts. Silvianus's curse and the case of the stolen ring might also have helped shape magic in modern fantasy fiction. Mortimer Wheeler, an archaeologist excavating the Temple of Nodens at Lydney Park in the 1920s, consulted Oxford professor J.R.R. Tolkien on the meaning of the name Nodens in the defixio inscription, leading some scholars to suggest that it may have inspired the One Ring in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. All right, I think before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by Celtic and by magic in this book, and in general. In this book, and in the scholarly context in which I normally work, Celtic refers primarily to a language family. This language family includes modern Celtic languages like Irish, Welsh, Breton, Cornish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx, as well as some that are no longer spoken, including Gaulish and Celtiberian, languages spoken on the continent in antiquity. So I use the word Celtic to refer to these languages, texts written in these languages, and multilingual environments in which these languages are used. I'm not necessarily using it to mean the diverse range of material culture, political organization, and self-identification of Celtic language speakers, ancient or modern. Indeed, most medieval Irish speakers would not have known that their language was closely related to Welsh, much less to the languages spoken by the people that Julius Caesar was fighting in Gaul in the 1st century BC. My definition of Celtic here is limited and linguistic, and because of the survival rate of evidence from the ancient and medieval periods, which is not very good, or at least not as good as we'd like it to be, this book primarily deals with written text, be they curse inscriptions, like the one I started with, charms written in the margins of later manuscripts, or longer works of medieval literature. Magic is also notoriously tricky to define. For most ancient and medieval people, both Celtic speakers and non-Celtic speakers, oh, are we changing microphone? No. Oh. Magic, we see it today still. So for most people in the ancient world and the Middle Ages, and indeed probably some people today, magic is not significantly different from religion, nature, or simply how they perceive the world around them. Even for many modern people, magic is a particularly slippery concept. Do you practice magic when you avoid stepping on cracks in the pavement to avert misfortune, or knock on wood to ensure good luck? Because magic is so difficult to define, and because it means different things to different people, and probably always has, I don't offer a firm definition in this book. The OED defines magic as, quote, the use of ritual activities or observances which are intended to influence the course of events or to manipulate the natural world, usually involving the use of an occult or secret body of knowledge. So this is the definition that I work loosely with. And I try to focus on the activities that regular people might have actually practiced on a daily basis. It is, of course, difficult to tell how much occult or secret knowledge pre-modern magic involved, since by definition it was supposed to be secret. This book has two halves, and I think my talk today will roughly parallel that. The first half talks about magic in the ancient world, so in Gaul and Roman Britain, as we've already seen. The second half talks about magic in the Middle Ages, specifically in Ireland and Wales, although there are a few diversions to Brittany, Cornwall, and Scotland as well. And it needs to be kept in mind that there isn't necessarily a lot of continuity between these locations and these temporal frames of reference. So the main continuity, such as there is that people are still speaking Celtic languages. That doesn't necessarily mean that what we see in our later medieval literature or our medieval charms shows continuous, unabated survival of pre-Christian ideas or texts or worship. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that for many medieval people, magic and Christianity are not necessarily opposing forces, and that they can operate together in the same worldview. So when a saint causes a miracle to occur, is this magic? Someone today might say it is, or they might say it isn't. But for many people in the past, this is, again, probably operating in the same basic frame of reference. As they might think about, here's a medical charm. If I recite it, I will get better. So, two halves of the book, different time periods, somewhat different geography. The main linking factor is the language family, not necessarily any continuity of belief. I want to go back to the curse tablets for a moment while we're here, because they offer some of what I think are the more exciting texts from the ancient world. They also offer us the genre that has preserved the largest amount of ancient Celtic. So if you're a linguist and you really want to know what's going on in Gaulish, you have to read a lot of curse tablets. The Lidney Park Defixio is written in Latin, but it mentions a Celtic god. We also have several that are written in Celtic languages. So at least 2 of the cursed tablets found in the Spring of Sulis Minerva at Roman Bath are also written in Celtic languages. We have a really hard time reading these because we don't have a lot of them. They're partly fragmentary, and there's nothing to directly compare them with. So they look a little bit different from the language that we see in some of the cursed tablets from Roman Gaul. But we're not 100% sure whether the British cursed tablets from Bath are written in the ancestor of the language that will eventually become Welsh and Cornish, or whether they're actually written in Gaulish and there are some people from France who are on holiday there and have written their cursed tablets. So it could be either. But in some of the material from Gaul, we have a lot more certainty as to what's going on. They're longer, they're more recognizable gods or concepts named in them. One of the exciting lead cursed tablets from Gaul is from Champollion, and it's found in a location along with a lot of little wooden figures representing different human body parts that we call ex-votos. And these are often dedicated, again, at healing shrines in the hope that the god will heal whatever illness is associated with this part of your body. So if, you leave a little wooden hand or a clay foot, maybe you've sprained your wrist, or maybe you've injured your foot, and you're hoping that this will show the god what they need to heal. It's common to find these in springs or cemeteries or kind of deep places, often associated with the underworld gods. I think especially when people are cursing, they're thinking about kind of retribution, they're thinking about violent infernal powers. So this tends to be where we find a lot of them. Although, again, we do tend to find some of them near healing sites as well, so there's kind of this reciprocity, right? The god can heal you, but perhaps they're also an avenue to pursue physical vengeance on someone. The inscription that we have on the Champollion tablet, again, we can't necessarily read all of it verbatim, because our knowledge of Gaulish is imperfect, but the more of these people dig up, the better we get at reading them. But it appears to mention the god Lugos, or Lug, who's found mentioned at a number of different sites throughout Celtic-speaking areas on the continent and throughout Britain, and there are characters with similar names who turn up in Irish literature. So this was clearly a fairly pan-Celtic god. You will sometimes come across people saying, oh, the character with the same name in Irish literature, definitely the same guy, this is the god, Lugos, and it's very possible that at some point someone thought this was the case, but I would ask you today, how many people do you know named Dennis or Denise or Denny? Are these people all named after the Greek god Dionysus? Since that's where the name comes from. Most of them probably aren't, so something to keep in mind there too. Even if the name shows a historic link, it doesn't mean anyone at the time is thinking of that. If someone writes a book today with a character named Dennis in it, they're probably not thinking of him as an avatar of Dionysus. We also have a very exciting cursed tablet. So this is our longest inscription in an ancient Celtic language. And this comes from Larzac, again, in southern France. It was found in a tomb, probably a tomb belonging to a woman named Gemma, because the name Gemma appears on a vase in the tomb. And what's really exciting about this is that it lists the name of a lot of women, and primarily women. There are a couple of men, but they seem to only be listed to show that they are a male relation of these women, to differentiate women with similar names. We're not, again, 100% sure what's happening in this inscription, but it clearly invokes a goddess named Adsagsona, who, again, unfortunately doesn't really turn up anywhere else, so we don't know what she's associated with, other than clearly some form of enacting justice. A lot of this inscription is simply lists of names of women and relational words showing how they're related to each other. So you have, for example, Paula, daughter of Potitia, Aya, daughter of Adiega, Potitia, mother of Paulia, and so on. It's unclear whether these are actual relationships, these are people's biological parents, or whether we're talking about some kind of witch's coven here. And these are kind of relational terms showing who's sponsoring somebody else for membership or some other kind of social relationship. A lot of the language used here looks very legalistic. And it's been proposed that it's some kind of legal charm in order to accomplish success in a legal case, or a counter charm to keep some group of magical women from exercising their supernatural powers and affecting the outcome of a legal case. What we see here is a mix of Gaulish and Latin names and different ways of forming patronymic, so people's relationships to their fathers. So clearly we have a pretty multicultural society here in which people are probably speaking Gaulish and Latin and moving around. Nearly 2,000 years after it was written, we don't understand all the details of the inscription, but we can name a group of women, and 1 or 2 men, who lived in a small town in Roman Gaul. They were probably not very wealthy people, or significant political actors who would have otherwise made much of a mark on the historical record. But we know their names. We know that these women had a complicated networks of relationships that extended well beyond the men in their families. They performed magic, or were seen as a formidable enough group of opponents that magic was used against them. And the inscription mentions the bonum bructem, the magic of women. So specifically, this is envisioned as not just a group of women who are involved in a curse, but who are specifically involved in some kind of female magic. Thanks to one fragmentary curse tablet, we can still hear a rare echo of their ancient voices and spells. So I've given you a couple of curse tablets in Gaulish that are a little bit harder for us to read. Here are some examples of curse tablets in Latin, but that mention other Celtic gods from other bits of the Roman Empire. So here's another one from Britain. This is found at Uli. And it's addressing the god Mercury. It says, "I bewail to your divine power, Mercury. I have lost some item. I ask the spirit of your divine power that you do not permit health to the one who is engaged in theft against me. Don't let them lie down, sit, drink, or chew, whether they be man or woman, boy or girl, enslaved or free, until they have brought back my item to me." This one's a little bit more intense. This one's from Austria. It says that my adversaries and whoever speaks against me, destroy all of them. I ask you to give all those who plan evil for me, to give to Ogmios to be taken away by death. So Ogmios, in this case, another Celtic deity. Some of these can get very violent. So there we've got some curses. How about some anti-curses? What do you do when you want to dispel a curse? So we're going to jump forward 1,000 years or more now, and now we are firmly in the Middle Ages. And we often find magic mentioned in the lives of saints from the Middle Ages. And in these lives, saints work miracles, but they also frequently fight against magicians, usually envisioned as pagan magicians, in especially Irish material, often envisioned as Druids. But you can ask the saint to help you, and sometimes the saint manages to enact things that look very curse-like as well, but for holy purposes. In one episode in the life of St. Cadog from Wales, the denouement gives the Indiana Jones film Raiders of the Lost Ark a run for its money when, after a miscreant has violated St. Cadog's church in Llancarvan in Glamorgan and tries to plunder the community's wealth, he is literally melted. And we hear that the sorry violator of the shrine melted away in the sight of the whole army like wax in front of the fire. This is one of my favorite ones to give to Latin students because they don't know what's happening yet. And you can see that their faces as they work out, that's the word for melt. What's going on here? But Cadog is not the only saint who sometimes responds particularly harshly. And you also get other Welsh saints melting malefactors, including Saints Tylo, Illtyd, and Conger. Irish saints sometimes make their displeasure known as well by fasting against kings or secular powers who are obstructing them. Indeed, in one late medieval Breton play about the life of Saint Non, the mother of Saint David of Wales, we have a cameo appearance by Saint Patrick, who fasts against God when God tells him he has to leave Britain for Ireland because David's going to come to Britain. In a cluster of medieval Irish texts about Saint Ruadhán, the saint protests against the Irish king Diarmaid mac Carbach, who has abducted a man seeking sanctuary with Ruadhán. Ruadhán and another saint fast, ring bells, and recite the psalms at the king until he complies with their wishes. The saint tells him that his kingdom will fall and that none of his descendants will rule after him. The statement is somewhere between a prophecy and a curse. The king has upset God by violating the saint's sanctuary, and events come to pass as the saint predicts. The recitation of the psalms, which often had a benign or benedictory purpose, could also expose wrongdoing, as here, or be used to publish an evildoer. So I said we're going to see some anti-curses. So there are saints enacting curse-like things for divine or holy purposes. There are also formulaic prayers invoking specific saints or attributed to specific saints that you often find, especially in the Gaelic-speaking world. So anyone could pray for Patrick to intercede with God on their behalf, but if you wanted something particularly effective against evil, and you lived in medieval Ireland, you might recite what we call St. Patrick's lorica. In Latin, the word lorica is a kind of breastplate or armor you wear over your chest, and this is your sort of spiritual breastplate. So you recite it, and it keeps evil things at bay. One of the best-known loricae from medieval Ireland is attributed to St. Patrick. It's written in Old Irish, it's the form of the Irish or Gaelic language, spoken between about 600 and 900 CE, which, if any of you know any early medieval Irish history, is a bit later than when St. Patrick is supposed to have lived, but it's associated with him nonetheless in popular medieval tradition. So this, I don't think I've included the whole thing here because it's rather long, but if you want a taste of it, you recite this to keep the evil forces at bay. I bind myself today, the power of God to guide me, the might of God to uphold me, the wisdom of God to teach me, the eye of God to watch over me, the ear of God to hear me, against the snares of demons, the temptations of vices, the lusts of nature, against every man who mediates injury to me, whether far or near, with few or with many. I have set around me all these powers against every hostile, savage power, directed against my body and soul, against the incantations of false prophets, against the black laws of heathenism, against the false laws of heresy, against the deceits of idolatry, against the spells of women and smiths and druids, and against all knowledge which harms the soul of men. So here, there is some language that might seem reminiscent of some of our curse inscriptions that we've just talked about. There's this idea of binding again, in this case, binding the supplicant to the power of God. There's the spells of women, and the term for this that they uses the Irish version of what are etymologically exactly the same words of what we saw in the Gaulish inscription from Larzac. So the banana brictum in Gaulish. And one might ask, is this the same formula? Does this represent some kind of ancient pan-Celtic formula, specifically talking about spells and magic of women? And it might. At the same time, it also alliterates. And people love some good alliteration, especially in sort of charms or amulets or poetic writing. So it's equally possible that this has just been coined multiple times because it alliterates and it sounds really good. Could go either way. And I think that's the state of much of the material in this book, and indeed across both the ancient and medieval corpus of Celtic magical inscriptions and texts featuring magic, is this could be ancient, or this could be original to this particular author in this particular text at this time. And it's really hard to tell which. I have a little bit of time left still. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I promised we would get to the hangover here. And this body of material, medieval medicine, does contain some things that, again, might be very ancient, but it also contains a lot that is universal within a greater European, North African, Mediterranean context in antiquity and the Middle Ages. And a lot of what we see in medieval European collections of medical recipes goes back to ideas about medicine found in ancient Greek authors, including Galen, but that have been transmitted through the Islamic world and owe a lot to the works of Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, as he's often called in English. And so what we see emerging here is different localized variants on a very universal corpus of medical learning and medical ideas. And this too you might look at and say, is this science or is this magic? Or is it both? So for instance, one medieval Welsh cure for fever says, drink rue mixed with wine, swallow coriander seeds, and drink wild celery mixed with water. Collect greater plantain, they love greater plantain, it's in every other recipe, while saying your paternoster, and drink that mixed with wine as well. So here, do we think the cure is brought about by the consumption of the herbs, by the recitation of the paternoster, the Latin prayer beginning Our Father, or by a combination of the two? Clearly, the medieval authors thought it was effective enough to write down and transmit. So it was probably some combination of the ritual activity, the ingredients, and the religious element. If you have overindulged in alcohol, you also get some suggestions from a collection of medieval Welsh medical recipes, including the fever charm, associated with the semi-legendary Meddygfon Meddfai, or physicians of Meddfai, who, as named characters, kind of suck up a lot of different medical texts that become attributed to them, whether or not they actually wrote them in the first place. So, step number 1, avoid getting drunk in the first place. Drink an eggshell of the juice of betony in the morning. That's going to keep you sober. Perhaps you have forgotten your eggshell or your betony, and now you've had a bit to drink and you need to sober up quickly. You're obviously not going to be driving home, but maybe you need to ride the horse home. Eat saffron crushed with spring water, and there you go, you'll sober up. If, however, you have failed to follow advice number 1 and 2, and now you have a horrible headache the next morning, there's a solution. Pound garlic, onion, and goat fat in a mortar and bandage it around the head. Leave it for 8 days. If you still have the headache out after 8 days, I don't know what's going on, but it's not the alcohol. Then you boil the oats in water for a long time, wash the bandage off the head with the warm oat and water mixture, and you repeat this procedure until the headache is cured. You might be 16 days in there or more. It goes without saying, you should probably check with your GP before you try any kind of herbal remedies for yourself, either those mentioned in the book or others. But hopefully this gives you a bit of a taste of the sorts of magic out there used by Celtic speakers across a range of time and places. And I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Brigid, thank you so much. We now have a few minutes for questions from the audience. We'll pass around microphones, so if you could use the microphone when asking your question, that would be greatly appreciated. So do just raise your hand if you have something you'd like to ask Brigid. Yes.
Thank you. You could argue that any praying is a degree of hope over experience, I suppose, if you carry on doing it. But a lot of these curses seem to be very specific. And they must have noticed that so-and-so was still alive, or you know, the donkey hadn't turned up. Is there any indication that of how they thought about this, that these very specific curses may not have worked?
Yes, no, this is a really good question. The short answer is it's hard to tell, but I think the more complicated answer is it kind of depends what you think they want out of the curse. Because on some level, if you want the catharsis of having expressed your upsetness, then there you go, it's worked. Some of them, the ones that I talked about here, are found in springs or found in tombs, so they're not necessarily generally available, but it's not uncommon to find these things, tacked up in the bathhouse, or we've found some in various amphitheaters across the Greco-Roman world. So there's some thought that this is a very performative action, and the fact that you have written this and put it somewhere publicly is almost enough to accomplish your desire, right? The accused person sees, oh no, so-and-so's really upset that I stole their shoes at the bath. So in that respect, maybe what we're looking at is not necessarily, and I want the god to rip out this person's viscera until they bleed to death, and that's absolutely going to happen, or it's not, and I'm going to become disillusioned with my god, but instead a kind of social corrective of showing displeasure or kind of social factors and producing shame, that kind of thing. So it depends a little bit on what you think is supposed to happen as a result. If you don't know who the culprit is, and it's one of these, whoever has done this, whether they're male or female, whether they're enslaved, whether they're free, whether they're local, whether they're a foreigner, one of these big kind of generic catch-all formulas, of course you don't know if it's happened or not. It might have happened. Maybe the god got vengeance for you. You just haven't gotten your shoes back.
Yes, you have a question. And then a question.
On that last point, were the lamella normally left open to be read by others, or were they rolled up? So normally on lead, weren't they?
The majority of them we have found kind of mangled up. Again,
Implies that you weren't expecting to.
but again, it depends a lot on the find site, and it depends, what we can't see is the process of creating these, right? Do you create them in a very public space and hang them up and then monk them up, or do you sort of munch them up first and throw them away? And I think it probably depends a lot on the individual and the case at hand and what kind of vengeance they want. This is one of the reasons they can be really hard to read, especially when they're in a language we don't have a lot of text surviving in otherwise, is because you've taken your lead, you've crumpled it up, and you've thrown it in a spring. And when we've hauled it out, 1,500, 2,000 years later, bits of it have fallen off. So I think the answer here is it's really dependent on the individual case and the people involved.
Yes, and we had another question in the middle, in the left.
I found it really interesting when you were talking about the women and their curses, and obviously this is massively before the witch hunt craze. But what was sort of, I guess, what do you think the response to that is, and is there anything that almost the beginnings of those, or did any of that and the way that women and magic were treated then sort of have any influence over?
It's a good question. So I don't think we have any direct influence between, early modern witch hunts on the one hand and people doing things in ancient Gaul on the other hand. But there's a lot of tropes that you see repeated across this material and in different corpora of material too. So I didn't talk about it, but I probably have time to read you a little bit here from some of the medieval texts that talk about witches and witchcraft. And I should just start by saying that generally we have pretty good gender representation in curse inscriptions, or if anything, they mention men more than they mention women. So the Gaulish one is a really interesting example out, especially given how few we have in Gaulish relative to Latin or Greek. But you definitely have tropes of witchcraft you see across ancient text and into the Middle Ages as well. There's a great bit from an old Irish poem called Recnia Fothed Conania, the poem of Fothed Conania, where the titular character, who is now a ghost and has just been killed, appears to his lover and gives her this chilling warning. And he says that, "Do not wait for the terror of the night on the battlefield, among the resting places of the hosts. One should not speak with a dead man. Go to your house, carry my spoils with you. Horrible are the huge entrails which the Morrigan washes. She has come to us from the edge of a pillar. It is she who egged us on. Many are the spoils she washes. Horrible the hateful laugh she laughs." So this is a kind of a chilling description of a battle spirit you see across a lot of medieval Irish texts called the Morrigan, which literally means great queen. And some people say, again, pre-Christian deity, and some people say character based on classical representations of furies or Christian representations of demons. And some people say some combination of all of these. But she turns up, often appearing like a raven, across a range of medieval Irish literature, specifically before battles or during battles. And this, again, becomes a literary trope that you see throughout texts from the early Middle Ages onward. In one of my favorite examples, there's a 14th century text called Carum Thoriulfwig, the kind of triumphant victories of Thorolbach, which is about a series of conflicts in Munster in Ireland between the O'Brien family and really another branch of the O'Brien family, but the Anglo-Norman family, the de Clares, get mixed up in this too. And in one bit towards the end of this text, Richard de Clare, who's the head of this family at this point in the text, and is marching his army to try to conquer this bit of northern Munster, encounters a woman who's described using all of the same language that you would see in an earlier medieval text describing creatures like the Morrigan or Bodhiv, which means kind of scald crow, and again is a kind of avian creature, or woman who appears before during battles. And she is there washing weapons and body parts in the river, and she ominously invites him and his entourage to hell. Like, she literally says, "I'll see you in hell." And he ignores her warning at his own peril, and then, of course, he dies in battle subsequently. So again, nice long history, both in the literary record, and then you can also find this in later folklore too, these kinds of characters. So in that respect, you see these tropes recycled, and you see a lot of interest in gender and magic.
If I could ask a quick question, do you have a favorite curse?
Do I have a favorite curse? Oh, that's a good one. I mean, the Larzac one, I think, is one of the more interesting ones, both from a linguistic point of view and from a social history point of view, because it does mention all of these women. There's a really fun one that we find in some of the medieval Irish literary material, though. And you can ask whether you think anyone did this in reality or whether this is a literary conceit. Here, we do find it in two texts. So if it is a literary conceit, it's one that has spread between texts, or it might be representative of some element of oral tradition. Maybe people have actually tried this. But it's what you do when you want to get rid of guests who have overstayed their welcome or some nosy neighbors that you don't like. So in one tale, there is a character called Oengus, or the Mag Og, the young son, who's an otherworldly being, and he has missed out when all of they're called the Shitha, or Shitha in the plural, but all of the kind of fairy mounds of Ireland have been distributed among the otherworldly beings in prehistory. And he hasn't gotten one, and so he needs to figure out how to get one. And there are a couple of different versions of how he manages this. In one, he tricks somebody out of their sheath mound by saying, "Can I just spend a night and a day there?" And the guy says, "Yes, of course." And then he comes back the next day to say, "Okay, can I have my mound back?" And Oengus goes, "Well, the world passes in nights and days," and plays on the fact that Irish at this period doesn't differentiate between night and day generally and a night and a day, because there's no word for a. There's no indefinite article. And so he's tricked him into giving it to him for all night and day. And then another version of this, he acquires it through trickery. And he uses this charm to banish the people who've been living there. And the charm goes, "Proclaim that your enemies cannot return until Ogma and his hound come together, until heaven and earth come together, until sun and moon come together." So expressing a bunch of impossibilities, you're sort of east of the sun, west of the moon kind of phrasing, right? That this is something that will happen in a very long time or in a kind of improbable fashion. So you could try this yourself if you've got a house guest who just won't leave, or maybe your neighbors are making a little bit too much noise at night. This is interesting. We had the god Ogmios turn up in one of our continental Celtic curse tablets that we mentioned earlier. This character Ogma, again, the name looks very similar, and some people have said that this must be later Irish reflex of the same deity, and some people have said that it's just a name and it's been recycled. But in Irish literature, in addition to being invoked in this charm to get rid of house guests or get rid of the people who own the house that you want, in this case, he's also credited with creating the Ogham, or in modern Irish, the Ogham alphabet. And this is a form of writing that involves little hash marks on the sides of rocks or pieces of wood. You never have lengthy texts written in them, although some medieval literature claims that people wrote lengthy texts in them. You'd need a really long side of a rock for a lengthy text. Mostly, in reality, they refer to, this is the rock of so-and-so, as in so-and-so owns this field, or so-and-so was buried here. But in the literary texts, this writing system sometimes has some kind of, you might say, magic value to it. And we're told that Ogma, who is a man well skilled in speech and poetry, invented the ogam. The cause of its invention was as a proof of his ingenuity, and so that this speech should belong to the learned apart, to the exclusion of rustics and herdsmen. So it's a means of kind of gatekeeping elite knowledge. And in this respect, it's perhaps not that unlike literacy in general, in especially the early Middle Ages, right? Not that many people are literate. And so here's a particular kind of encoded writing system that you only know if you are well-educated, is the idea here. So in this respect, we might call it magic, right? It is occult or hidden knowledge in the sense that it's not widely shared. There's a great manuscript called the Book of Ogam, or text called the Book of Ogam that we find in the Book of Ballymote manuscript. And it has a bunch of things you can do with different sorts of Ogam, including you can use it for divinatory purposes. So there's one variant on the Ogam alphabet in it called Boy Ogam, which allegedly allows you to determine the gender of an unborn child. The letters of the mother's name are counted up, and if they add up to an odd number, the child's going to be a boy. If they add up to an even number, the child is going to be a girl. If the mother's already had one child, you use the name of the previous child instead. What you do if she's had multiple children, I don't know, maybe the most recently born child. But here again, you've got this idea that you can use this slightly encoded or specialized writing system for some magical purpose.
We have, I think, one final question over here.
So it sounds like the norm was that people would do curses or protections themselves. Would they also go to people who were more skilled, like druids and saints and so on?
Yeah, so in the literary text, definitely you get people going to ask the saint for help. Or you rarely have, well, you sometimes have people asking druids for advice, especially, asking them for knowledge in the medieval literary texts. In reality, it's probably a mix of going to specialized professionals and doing things yourself at home. So, for instance, some of the early curse tablets are really badly spelled. The letter forms are kind of wonky. And the idea is that people writing these probably aren't used to doing a lot of writing, or this isn't, again, very high-status textual production. Some of them look a lot better and are very formulaic, and this might be you have gone to the local person who specializes in doing this. They might do other things too. They might be a scribe or notary. They might be in charge of other magical things, who knows, but you go to them and they will write you a good curse tablet. Similarly, and once we're in the Middle Ages, with some of the medical material, when we only have it as a textual record, it's obviously going to be limited to the people who can read it. But that doesn't mean that people who are not able to read it don't know it in some form, or you couldn't go to someone who would read it off and then you could take this home with you and recite it yourself if you don't have access to medicine. Increasingly, we see medicine across the Middle Ages becoming a specialized and professionalized field, and you get medical families in both Wales and Ireland, and indeed across medieval Europe, who specialize in medical learning and have manuscripts that they have compiled over the course of a couple of generations. And so at this point, it's very much you go to the specialist. But again, you might memorize the term, take it home, tell your friend. That we just can't see because it's not written down.
Well, we have a few matters to conclude with. Firstly, I want to encourage you, now that you've had this really, really intriguing taster of the book, it is available for you to buy from Fox Lane Books outside. I should also say, in addition to being fascinating, it is one of the most beautiful books I have come across in a long time. If you look at that cover there are these beautiful green-tinted illustrations. So wonderful in many respects, and Brigid will also be available signing your copy as well. And then just to conclude, if we could give a vote of thanks to Brigid for giving such an absolutely fantastic paper that gave us such insight into a book that is not only incredibly scholarly, but also great fun to read.